Sit at the back. This row is not for people like you. She said nothing. She just sat down. What Farida did not know, she had just insulted the owner of her own hospital.
Nsambya Heights Medical Centre did not rise out of luck. It rose out of 11 years of unpaid nights, borrowed generators, and one woman who refused to let a single patient die because they could not afford dignity. From the outside, it looked like glass and steel and quiet confidence, 3 floors of white walls, a private wing for the wealthy, a general ward for everyone else, and a name above the entrance that Kampala had learned, slowly, to trust. What no one saw, standing beneath that sign, was the woman who built it, watching from behind tinted glass, wondering if the trust she had built was still standing on solid ground. Her name was Dr. Kirabo Nandagire, and she had not always worn tailored blazers or walked through marble corridors that carried her name in brass letters. She began with a single rented room in Tinda, a second-hand examination table, and a stethoscope she had bought with money meant for her own rent. In those early years, she treated malaria, delivered babies at 2 in the morning, and sat with dying men whose families could not afford to say goodbye properly. She remembered every one of them. That memory was the only thing she had refused to let success erase. 11 years later, that single room had become 3 floors of glass and stone. Kirabo sat now in an office overlooking the general ward, dressed the way success expected her to dress, a wine-red blazer dress, sharp cheekbones catching the afternoon light, a woman who had learned to command a room without raising her voice. She had built a private wing for those who could pay, and a general ward for those who could not, and she had promised herself, on the day she opened both doors, that neither would ever be allowed to forget the other existed. The first crack appeared quietly, the way most important things do. It was Advocate Rehima Bayanayama who noticed it first, buried inside a routine audit she had requested out of habit rather than suspicion. Charity fund disbursements that did not match the names of the patients who supposedly received them. Donations recorded as spent on wards that had, according to maintenance logs, not been renovated in 3 years. Rehima was not a woman who accused without proof. So she said nothing to Kirabo yet. She simply kept a file, and kept watching. It took 3 more weeks, and one anonymous phone call, before Rehima finally walked into Kirabo's office and closed the door behind her. She did not sit down. She placed the file on the desk instead, the way people place things they do not want to be the one to explain out loud. "There are complaints," she said carefully. "Patients from the general ward. Families saying they were turned away for money that should have already been covered by the charity fund. I have checked the numbers, Kirabo. The fund exists on paper. I do not think it exists anywhere else." Kirabo did not raise her voice. She had learned, over 11 years, that anger rushed toward conclusions, and conclusions built on anger were rarely accurate. She opened the folder slowly, read every line twice, and felt something settle in her chest, not rage yet, but the particular stillness that comes right before it. "Who signs off on the fund disbursements?" she asked. Rehima's answer came without hesitation. "Okwa Semwanga. It has always been Okwa." Kirabo closed the folder. "Then I need to see this place the way a stranger sees it. Not as the owner. As someone with nothing." The plan was simple in theory and difficult in practice. Kirabo would walk into her own hospital as a stranger, poor, tired, unremarkable, and sit in the same waiting room, breathe the same recycled air, and wait the way every powerless person in Kampala had learned to wait. Rehima would monitor from the outside, quietly, without alerting a single member of staff. No warnings. No preparation. If corruption lived inside these walls, it would not know to hide from a woman in a faded dress. It had never had a reason to. That night, Kirabo stood in front of her bedroom mirror and began removing herself, piece by piece. The gold earrings came off first, then the bracelet, then the sleek bun unraveled until her hair sat flat and unremarkable beneath a faded headscarf she had bought from a roadside stall that morning for 2,000 shillings. She pulled on a floral dress with a frayed hem, the kind meant to be replaced years ago. She looked into the mirror and did not recognize the woman looking back. That was, she realized, exactly the point. The next morning, Nokoto walked through the main gate of Nsambya Heights Medical Centre carrying a thin plastic bag with nothing inside it but an old exercise book and a bottle of water. At the security booth sat Musim Waswa, a guard who had worked that gate for 9 years and had long since stopped expecting anyone to greet him. He looked up as she passed, gave a small, tired nod, and said nothing more. It was such a small thing. But Kirabo noticed, immediately, that it was more courtesy than she had received from anyone in a designer uniform in a very long time. Inside, the general ward waiting area was already half full, plastic chairs bolted in uneven rows, a ceiling fan turning too slowly to matter, the smell of antiseptic layered over something more human and more tired. Behind the front desk sat Nurse Farida Nakabai, her ponytail sharp and high, her nails freshly done, her designer handbag placed deliberately in view where every patient could see it. She glanced up as Nokoto approached the desk, and in that single glance, Kirabo watched a woman decide, instantly and without apology, exactly how much this patient was worth. Name, Farida said, not looking up fully, already typing before the answer had even come. Nokoto, Kirabo replied quietly, keeping her voice smaller than her own, softer, the way survival had taught countless women in that room to speak. Farida's eyes flicked to the plastic bag, to the frayed hem of the dress, to the cracked slippers, and something closed behind her expression. General ward is full this morning. You will wait. She did not offer a chair number. She did not offer a wait time. She simply looked past Kirabo toward the door, already searching for the next patient, one who might look like they mattered more. Kirabo found an empty plastic chair near the back wall and sat, plastic bag on her lap, and let herself simply watch. It did not take long to see her. A thin woman near the far corner, wrapped in a faded orange gomisi-style dress, clutching a small boy against her side, his body limp with fever, his breathing shallow and quick. Her name, Kirabo would learn later, was Namolai Kobuzini, and the boy was her son, Baroka, 6 years old, burning with a fever that had already lasted 2 days. Namolai's eyes kept moving toward the reception desk, and every time they did, they filled a little more with fear. Namolai approached the desk a second time, voice trembling but polite. Please, she said, my son has had fever for 2 days. He is not eating. I only need someone to look at him. Farida did not look up from her screen. Payment first. Charity fund forms need approval from administration. That can take a few days. A few days. Kirabo watched Namolai's shoulders fall, watched her return to her seat carrying the particular defeat of someone who has been told no by a system too large to argue with. Baroka coughed weakly against his mother's shoulder. No one at the desk turned to look. It was nearly 10 in the morning when Dr. Mugisha Kovuma crossed the waiting area, white coat pressed and gleaming, gold link wristwatch catching the lights with every step. He did not walk toward the general ward. He walked toward the private wing entrance, where a wealthy-looking family waited beside a gleaming black car parked just outside. He greeted them warmly, laughed at something the father said, and disappeared through the private wing doors without so much as a glance toward the dozens of patients waiting quietly on the other side of the room. Namolai watched him go. So did Kirabo. Kirabo moved to the seat beside Namolai, plastic bag set gently between them, and offered the only thing she had brought with her that morning besides patience. How long has he been sick? She asked softly. Namolai looked at her, surprised that anyone had spoken to her without a clipboard in hand. 2 days, she said. I sell vegetables at Nokawa Market. I closed my store today. I do not know what I will feed him tomorrow if I do not open it again. Kirabo listened, really listened, the way she used to listen in that small clinic in Tinder, before glass walls and brass letters had come between her and rooms exactly like this one. By noon, Baraka's fever had climbed higher. His small body trembled even wrapped in the thin blanket, his lips cracked and dry, his breathing shallow and fast. Namolai pressed the back of her hand against his forehead and her face changed in a way that no mother should ever have to show a stranger. She stood, walked back to the desk a third time, her voice no longer polite but desperate. Please, he is getting worse. Please, just let someone look at him. Farida sighed, the particular sigh of someone deeply inconvenienced by another person's emergency, and picked up her phone instead of the intercom. That was when Nurse Adia Sibonya appeared from the corridor behind the desk, arms full of patient charts, and stopped the moment she saw Namolai's face. She did not need to be told what was happening. She had seen this exact scene too many times before. She set the charts down, walked around the desk without asking permission, and knelt in front of Baraka, pressing 2 fingers gently against his wrist to check his pulse. How long has he had this fever? She asked Namolai directly, her voice calm and unhurried, the first calm voice Namolai had heard all morning. Adia did not wait for approval forms. She lifted Baraka carefully into her arms and told Namolai to follow her, straight past the front desk, straight past Farida's protest that patients could not be moved without payment clearance. He has a fever of nearly 40 degrees, Adia said, not stopping, not slowing down. I will explain it to Dr. Kovuma myself if I have to. Kirabo watched her go, watched the particular quiet courage of a junior nurse choosing a sick child over her own job security, and felt something in her chest tighten that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with recognition. Inside a small treatment room, Adia laid Baraka gently on the examination bed and began walking quickly, checking his temperature properly, listening to his chest, preparing and foreline for fluids he desperately needed. Dr. Mugisha appeared in the doorway moments later, drawn by the commotion, his expression already hardening before he had even asked a single question. This child has no cleared file, he said flatly. You cannot simply pull resources for every case that walks through that door, Adia. We are not a charity. With respect, Doctor, Adia said, not looking up from the foreline, her hand steady despite the confrontation, this child has a fever of 39.8. If we wait for paperwork, we may be treating something far worse by evening. Mugisha's jaw tightened. He glanced at Namolai's worn dress, at the frayed cloth bag on the floor, and made a decision that had nothing to do with medicine. 10 minutes, he said. Then this room needs to be available for scheduled patients. He turned and left without another word, his white coat sweeping behind him like punctuation on a sentence he did not think worth finishing. Kirabo had followed quietly, standing near the doorway of the treatment room where no one thought to notice a poor man in a headscarf. She watched Adia work with a precision and gentleness that no salary could properly compensate. She watched Namolai's hands shake with gratitude too large for words. And she made a decision, standing there in her disguise, that whatever else this investigation uncovered, Adia Sibonya would not leave this hospital without knowing she had been seen. Later that afternoon, in the administrative wing 3 floors above, Okwa Semwanga sat behind his desk, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, a habit that surfaced whenever numbers refused to behave themselves. On his screen sat the quarterly charity fund report, and beside it, a private banking application he closed quickly whenever footsteps passed his door. He had been doing this for 4 years. He had told himself, every single time, that it was temporary, that he would return every shilling once his own debts were cleared. The debts had never cleared. The withdrawals had never stopped. By evening, Boroka's fever had begun to break, thanks entirely to Adia's insistence and the fluids she had fought to get him. But the treatment was not free, and Namolai was called once more to the front desk, this time by Farida herself, who slid a printed invoice across the counter with the practiced indifference of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. 180,000 shillings, Farida said. Payable before discharge. Namolai stared at the number the way people stare at things too large to survive. She did not have it. She did not have half of it. Kirabo stepped forward then, still Nokoto, still small and unremarkable in her faded dress. Is there not a charity fund for cases like this? She asked quietly. I have heard this hospital has one. Farida's eyes flicked toward her, sharp and immediate. That fund requires a formal application. It is not automatic. It is not for everyone who simply asks. The lie came so smoothly, so rehearsed, that Kirabo understood in that moment exactly how many times it had been told before, and to how many mothers exactly like Namolai. Outside, in the hospital parking area, Advocate Rehima Bayanayama sat inside a parked car, laptop open on her thighs, quietly cross-referencing every transaction Okwa had approved that week against patient records Kirabo had photographed discreetly on a small hidden device tucked inside her plastic bag. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Charity approvals denied at the front desk, while the fund itself, according to Okwa's own records, showed regular disbursements that matched no patient file Rehima could find anywhere in the system. Back inside, Namolai sat helpless beside her son's bed, staring at the invoice she had no way to pay, while Adia finished her shift notes nearby, glancing toward her more than once with quiet, unspoken concern. When the ward finally quieted for the evening, Adia did something no policy would ever have asked of her. She walked to the small ATM near the hospital entrance, withdrew money from her own account, an amount that represented nearly a third of her monthly salary, and returned to settle Namolai's invoice herself, asking only that she never mention it to anyone. When Namolai discovered what Adia had done, she wept the way people weep when kindness arrives at the exact moment they had stopped expecting it. I cannot accept this, she whispered. You do not even know me. Adia only smiled, tired but sincere. I know what it feels like to be told to wait when waiting could cost you everything. Kirabo, standing quietly near the doorway once more, felt her throat tighten. She had built 3 floors of glass and steel to prevent exactly this kind of desperation. And somehow, it had been happening anyway, in rooms she never walked through in her own name. That night, Kirabo did not go home immediately. She sat instead in her car outside the hospital, still dressed as Nokoto, and allowed herself, for the first time all day, to feel the full weight of what she had witnessed. A nurse paying for a stranger's child out of her own pocket. A doctor who could not be bothered to look up from his watch. A front desk that had turned lying into routine. And somewhere above all of it, a man in a too-tight suit deciding, quietly and repeatedly, that charity money belonged to him more than it belonged to children like Boroka. The following morning, Kirabo called Rehima before the sun had fully risen. I have seen enough, she said. I want the full audit finished by tomorrow. Every disbursement, every signature, every account Okwa has touched in the last 4 years. And Rehima, I want proof strong enough that no lawyer he hires can talk his way around it. Rehima, already awake, already walking, simply said, it will be ready. Some promises, Kirabo had learned, were worth more coming from people who never made them lightly. That day, Kirabo returned to the hospital once more as Nokoto, this time not simply to observe, but to test the last piece of the puzzle. She approached Okwa's office directly, claiming she had heard of a charity fund and wished to formally apply on Namulai's behalf. Okwa barely looked up from his desk. "The fund is currently under review," he said smoothly, a lie so practiced it barely required thought. "Try again next month." Kirabo thanked him quietly and left, closing his office door behind her with the particular calm of a woman who had just heard exactly what she needed to hear. The next morning, Kirabo called a full staff meeting in the main conference hall, a request unusual enough that whispers had already spread through every department before 9 o'clock. Doctors, nurses, and administrators filed in, uncertain, murmuring among themselves. Okwa sat near the front, tie-straightened with visible effort. Farida checked her reflection in her phone screen one last time. Dr. Mugisha leaned back with the confident boredom of a man who assumed this meeting, like every meeting, had nothing to do with him. Then the side door opened, and a woman in a faded flower dress and a brown and orange headscarf walked to the front of the room. A ripple of confused whispers moved through the crowd, a cleaner, perhaps, wandering into the wrong meeting. She reached the podium, removed her headscarf slowly, and let her natural hair fall loose. She reached into her plastic bag and pulled out her gold earrings, sliding them back into place one at a time, unhurried, deliberate. By the time she looked up at the room, every whisper had died completely. "Good morning," said Dr. Kirabo Nandagire. "I believe some of you have already met me. You called me Nokoto." The room did not simply go quiet. It went still, the specific stillness of people rapidly recalculating everything they thought they understood about the last 2 days. Farida's phone slipped from her hand and clattered against the floor. Dr. Mugisha sat forward so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the tire. Okwa's face drained of color entirely, his hand instinctively reaching for the folder he no longer had with him. Kirabo let the silence stretch exactly as long as it needed to. "For the past 2 days," Kirabo said, voice calm and level, carrying easily across the silent room, "I sat in my own waiting room as a stranger. I watched a mother beg for help her son was owed. I watched a nurse lie about a charity fund that, according to our own records, disbursed over 11 million shillings this year alone." She paused, letting the number settle. "Not 1 shilling of it reached the family I watched suffer in that waiting room." Her eyes moved deliberately to Okwa. "Perhaps Mr. Semanga can explain where it went instead." Advocate Rihima Bayanayama entered from the side door at that exact moment, laptop and printed files in hand, and moved to stand beside Kirabo without a word needing to pass between them. She placed the document on a nearby table. 4 years of falsified disbursement records, matched precisely against Okwa's personal bank statements, transfers timed within hours of each supposed charity approval. Okwa stood abruptly, words stumbling out about misunderstandings and pending repayments, but the room had already stopped listening. The evidence spoke in a language far more convincing than his. Okwa Semwanga was suspended that same hour, his access to every hospital account revoked before he had even finished collecting his belongings from his office. Dr. Mugisha Kovuma received a formal written warning, along with a new policy requiring every doctor to rotate through general ward duty twice a month, whether they wished to or not. Nurse Farida Nakaba was moved permanently away from front desk operations, reassigned to a department with far less discretion over who received care and who did not. Consequences, Kirabo had learned long ago, meant far more when they arrived without warning. Baraka recovered fully within the week, his fever long gone, his laughter returning in small bursts as he chased a borrowed toy car down the general ward corridor while his mother watched, finally able to breathe without fear attached to every hour. Kirabo personally cleared every shilling of their invoice, backdated the charity approval Namulai should have received on her very first request, and quietly ensured that Namulai's market store rent was covered for the following 3 months, a gesture Namolai would not learn the true source of until much later. Nurse Adia Sibonia was called into Kirabo's office 2 weeks later, certain she was about to be reprimanded for moving a patient without clearance. Instead, Kirabo slid a folder across the desk, a promotion to senior ward nurse, along with full reimbursement for the money she had quietly spent from her own pocket that first evening. "I do not reward rule-breaking," Kirabo said, allowing herself something close to a smile. "I reward the kind of person who breaks the right rules for the right reasons. This hospital needs more of you than it currently has." Within a month, Kirabo had rebuilt a charity fund from the ground up, placing it under Rehima's direct legal oversight, requiring 2 independent signatures for every disbursement, and installing a transparent tracking system that any patient could check simply by asking. She hired 3 new nurses to ease Adia's overwhelming caseload. She quietly funded a small clinic renovation in Nokawa Market itself, close enough that women like Namolai would never again have to choose between a sick child and a day's income just to reach help. Months later, Kirabo still occasionally wore that faded flower dress, folded carefully in the back of her closet, not as a costume, but as a reminder. She had built glass walls and brass letters and a name Kampala trusted, but trust, she had learned, was never something a building could protect on its own. It required someone willing to sit quietly in the back row, in worn slippers, and watch closely enough to notice who truly deserved that trust, and who had simply been counting on no one ever checking. The hospital did not need a founder who watched from above. It needed one willing, every so often, to sit among the people she had built it for.